Great. And our second evening of the night, see we're moving along already, is the City Council's Committee of the Whole. I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Mr. Gehrig?
Here.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing.
Here.
Great. Does anyone have additions to the agenda? Are there any staff here to give a staff report this evening?
I'll do it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, why don't we do both of those council announcements? Dennis, you want to go first?
Yes, hi. I'd like to invite everybody in the listening audience and the people here in Chambers to an event which the city is sponsoring in conjunction with the University of Illinois. It's going to be a celebration of the African American arts and creativity and culture and spirit in Urbana. It's going to be a 2-hour program at the Levis Center on the university campus, just west of Lincoln Avenue. And it'll be held on the 15th, Saturday, November 15th, from 2 to 4 p.m. And we are going to, this is one of the events scheduled for the annual 175th birthday celebration that the city has been participating in this last year. We're going to have a free program with music, stories for the Negro Baseball League, more better music, Deja Vu blues vocalists, traditional contemporary gospel singers, pickup jazz quartet. We'll have 4 African American artists showing their work, and there will be soul food catered by the Classic Events Catering Company of the Levis Faculty Center. So this event is a Saturday. It's part of the birthday celebration for our city, and I invite everybody to attend.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. Lynn?
Thank you, Brandon. I'd like to point out that I put at your desk tonight the Champaign County Economic Development Corporation's strategic plan. It's a 3-year plan, and all the objectives are in there and the metrics. I would be happy as chair for us to plan at some point next spring to come back and just give an update on where we're at with our metrics. But this is pretty comprehensive and in terms of some of the deliverables that we want to accomplish this year. And since I sit on there as your rep, as your city council rep, I want to make sure each of you had a copy of that. Our annual meeting was a little less than 2 weeks ago and had excellent attendance, about 160 people, so double that of last year. So there's a lot of interest in economic development in Champaign County, and we have a lot, despite some of the things in terms of going on in our economy, I think there's still a lot of good things happening here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Mayor?
I have a question for Lynn. Last year, did you give a free lunch for your meeting?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
To the,
Are you talking about the one in the stadium?
this year it's at the stadium.
Okay.
This
Well,
year,
I thought it was a very nice event, and I'm just wondering if you gave a free lunch last year.
we did.
Okay.
We did.
Okay, but this was twice as good. Okay, thank you.
Any other announcements from council? Okay. Next, we have approval of minutes of the previous meeting. There were minutes from October 27 here. First, are there any corrections? None. A motion to approve?
Move approval.
Okay.
A second.
Seconded by Dennis. It was a fast call there. Any final changes before a vote? All those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Next, we have public input. I have not received any cards. If anybody's here from the public to speak to us tonight, there are yellow and blue cards on the back table. I'll give a few more seconds here. It doesn't look like anybody's jumping to hand them in. We will move on into our agenda, and if people still want to talk about any specific topics, they can fill out a card and say which topic they want to speak in front of as we go through tonight's topics. Our first item of business is Ordinance 2008-11-129. This is an ordinance amending the City of Urbana Comprehensive Plan 2005 for the Crystal Lake Neighborhood Plan Amendment. And this came from a council meeting so that we could discuss further some wording. There are 3 different versions of wording here on your desks. Maybe first I'll go to staff and see if staff have any update on this case or any new information since we last discussed it.
And
Robert
before we
Myers?
begin, I'd just like to recuse myself from discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Robert Myers?
As you mentioned, this was forwarded from the November 3rd City Council meeting, and our city staff report had a couple of recommendations for minor adjustments to the plan based on public comments along the process, and also Plan Commission recommendations. I think the one that was most discussed last time, and the question revolved around, had to do with housing and Carl campus expansion. We have before us, I think, 2 or 3 different slightly different possible wording. If I could make an observation, I was thinking of this a little while ago, just so we can keep this in mind, there's a couple of ways that this can be done. One is that you can talk about the process, or we could talk about the outcome. And if we want to talk about the process, we can say that, and then you think about whose responsibility are we placing this on? Are we placing this responsibility of the process on the city? Are we placing the outcome on Carl Hospital? That's a couple of ways to think about it. The goal actually says under Goal 10 currently, seek replacement of housing lost due to Carl expansion 1-to-1 with housing opportunities in the larger neighborhood, such as Crystal Lake Townhomes, Kerr Avenue, and Stratum on University. Well, actually, it's interesting that when you get to, that's the goal, and then the implementation is actually not as concrete. The language is not as concrete. But we're saying that the city is responsible under responsible city division. We say community development, and then as the implementation strategy, we have currently worded encourage Carl Hospital to support 1-to-1 replacement housing. So it sounds like the goal is more oriented toward the process, I think, and then the implementation strategy is a little more oriented toward the outcome. You could think about it in those terms.
Okay, great. And maybe what I'll do is hear from the mayor and then others so that everybody can have a chance to at least explain what they left us on our desks and what their proposal for wording is, and read that into the record so that everyone's aware of it, and describe what is, what's unique about their proposal that they want to make sure we capture in whatever final version might get put together. So maybe we'll start with the mayor and the version that she's provided for us tonight here. Mayor?
Okay. What I've done is, I think all these versions that we're looking at are very similar. The wording is different, but I think the intent is very similar. And so I've revised the one that I gave you last week to stress what the positions of each of these entities is. And let me just read it to you. In order to implement the City of Urbana's commitment to neighborhood preservation, energy efficiency, and sustainability, and Carl Foundation's commitment to the city to be part of the solution to finding replacement housing if residences are removed due to Carl expansion, the city and Carl Foundation shall negotiate in consultation with the people of the neighborhood to provide energy-efficient replacement housing. And the rationale, in addition to our concern about sustainability, is that I felt if anyone was asked to move, that one way to make it more palatable and make it be a benefit for them would be to help them have energy-efficient housing so that their new residence would be less expensive to maintain than the old one.
Great. Any questions about the mayor's version before other people maybe speak to theirs? Questions, feedback? Dennis?
Yeah. One of the topics that we talked about previously was whether we would hope that Carl would do one-for-one replacement. And some people felt like they shouldn't be required to do that much, and other people felt that it was important to indicate that it was pretty much a replacement in kind for the housing that was lost. So the mayor doesn't specifically mention that, but I'd like to ask the mayor if she could help us understand her point of view.
Yeah,
Mayor?
I don't think it was ever put on Carl to do the whole thing. what we're talking about, what they committed to was to be part of the solution. And so all we're saying is that the mechanism to find what part of the solution they're going to be is that we will sit down and negotiate with them in consultation with the people of the neighborhood. But everybody agrees that we should protect the neighborhood, and we don't know how exactly that's going to be done, but as long as we're going to, if we have to, provide new housing, and we're not sure if we will, it depends on what Carl does, that be energy efficient.
Robert?
Well, I think the mayor's point is well taken with the process, and I think the process is clear with regard to how Carl responded in their report. We recognize that they're not totally responsible for one-to-one replacement, but on the other hand, we recognize that the long range, they will be a part of the process, and this makes it clear as to what our objectives might be, and is in line with our process rather than the outcome.
Any other questions or feedback on this version? Charlie?
I like the mayor's version over the other two that have been presented here because it's simpler and does, as Robert mentions, stick to the process involved. It's all about what you negotiate with Carl anyway. And you know, the implementation stuff actually has specific wording as well to work with. So, you know, my own feeling is that, and I think this is important to note, is that we've had taxable property taken off the rolls in the city by the university, by the school district, by the park district, different time. Those are government entities, and sort of hard to fight the right hand fighting with the left hand on that. But and in many of those situations, part of a comprehensive plan situation. Here we've got, you know, we're changing residential to a business zoning. That's always a little more complicated. We're moving from, we've got a semi, it's not a public entity, but a not-for-profit in many ways, assuming control of taxable properties, and we lose those off the tax rolls. It's also very affordable housing, and so I have serious concerns about where Carl is headed into the neighborhood when there's developable property on University Avenue that I see that's very, very available from a developer point of view. It might cost a little more, but you know, so whatever we do here, I think we need to leave ourselves a lot of options to encourage Carl to both, you know, help us maintain affordable housing, or to expand in ways that are more compatible with the neighborhood.
Any other comments or discussion on this version? Okay, did anyone? Okay, Heather, go ahead. Sorry.
I will say I do, for the most part, like the mayor's version of what we've kind of taken from what staff has given us, from what I recommended last week, from what Charlie brought before us. Since Carl's not here tonight, I think that maybe it would be good that if we forward this, that we could see if Carl could be here next, representatives from Carl could be here, so that through the week maybe people can talk to them, or they could be here next week if people want to talk to them about how this, you know, I mean, if we're going to do negotiations, I don't think it's a problem to almost negotiate here, you know, with the wording. So I don't know if it's ready, not. Mayor, do you think this is ready to go, or I thought you maybe mentioned that maybe we
Well, I mean, judging on the comments that they gave, I would assume that they've said that they're willing to be part of the solution, and they're willing to talk with us about it. So it's not requiring them to do the whole thing, it's requiring them to just work with us to consider the consequences of what they do and how to preserve the neighborhood. I mean, what we did is 15 years ago, there was a real big battle. And what I tried to do here was make sure that everybody sat down and work things out. And Carl took the initiative to have open hearings, and I think they worked very well. And I think we should just continue that process. And there may be alternatives that turn out to be better for them on University Avenue. I don't know about that, but in any case, if we've got a commitment to preserving neighborhoods, I don't think we can just let 50 houses go without replacing them.
I would agree with the fact that we can't just let them go, but I don't think we also should say that we are requiring Carl to do one-to-one, and that's obviously struck from your version tonight, and that I think is important. I mean, the city of Urbana had, Lakeside, and it's no longer there, so I think it's a little disingenuous for us to ask Carl to do one-to-one, and so I am glad to see that that's not here tonight. So,
I think that was kind of a misunderstanding, because I don't think anybody ever said that Carl should do it one-to-one. We said there should be one-to-one replacement, but that needed to be negotiated on exactly how it could be accomplished. We don't know. Maybe with the new administration in Washington, we'll have some money for housing. You just never know what's going to happen. But we have to sit down and figure this out, and we probably don't have to solve the entire problem all at once. We can probably solve it as it arises, because the situations may change.
all right.
Charlie?
I don't expect Carl to have any problem with what the mayor has proposed here, and unless Dennis wants to talk about his version of this, I'd just soon move the mayor's version as an amendment, but I'll wait for Dennis to comment.
Dennis, any comments?
Okay. Well, I sat down to think about this myself, and I wasn't originally going to add 2 more pennies to the pile, but in the original writing on the Crystal Lake neighborhood plan on page 51, in the implementation strategies, I think we felt that the word encourage Carl Hospital was too soft, and yet there was a discussion that requiring them to do such and such was too strong. So I tried to create wording that would fall in between those two things. So my wording was create 1-for-1 replacement housing for Crystal Lake neighborhood residents, where residents are removed due to Carl Hospital expansion plans, with Carl Hospital, the City of Urbana, and residents of the Crystal Lake neighborhood working in partnership with local housing providers to find appropriate energy efficiency housing solutions at locations such as Crystal View Townhomes, Kerr Avenue, and other locations. So I thought that hit kind of like a middle mode, and yet defined the fact that we do expect Carl and the city and the residents of the Crystal Lake neighborhood to work together to solve the solution of replacement housing, adequate and 1-for-1 replacement housing. Now, if we don't want to specify it needs to be necessarily 1-for-1, my only thought is that in earlier replacements of low-income housing, we've always seemed to replace them with medium-income housing and not the complete number of low-income housing that might have been in existence at a location. And I know that not all these houses are necessarily that kind of replacement, but it's a concern for me. And so I just, I provided this. I'm not, I think we can talk about it. I'm more comfortable now with the mayor's most current version, because I think basically she's aiming for the very same things that I thought needed addressing.
Okay. A motion would be in order, I guess. Charlie?
I'll move to amend the comprehensive plan amendment itself to include the mayor's language for strategy H1.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Robert. Is there any other discussion of this? Actually, is there any other discussion of this change first, and then we'll maybe take a vote to send the whole thing? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, that carries. Then the Then the item is here in committee, and I guess we don't really have a motion to officially send this back now and reroute it to council so that we could take it up for a final vote next week if people are happy with that.
Which
Charlie?
I so move.
Okay. Seconded by Dave Gehrig. Any other comments on the whole? This will be the last time in committee then that we would see the whole Crystal Lake neighborhood plan. So I know there's lots of other pieces besides this one. If at this point, the floor is open for any sort of comments before we are finished with the topic. Robert? Okay. Anyone else?
I
Charlie?
guess I'd just like to thank everybody involved with it again for putting it all together. I'm sure it's not perfect, but at least we've gotten a lot of input on it from a lot of different sources, and I think it's a model way of developing these kinds of things. Including it in the comp plan is a reflection of that. And I made my comments about the neighborhood itself and what where I think some of the development should go directionally earlier, sort of jumping the gun, but in general, I like this approach. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, yeah, Robert.
As we went through this plan, and I do appreciate everyone's involvement, I think there were some questions raised as to some of the neighborhood plans and how they relate to the comprehensive plan. I think it's appropriate for us to develop in the future some degree of continuity between, the plans, such that you will not have that kind of a question. A neighborhood plan, why is mine different than this one? I think it'd be appropriate to try, if that's possible, to look at it and develop some degree of continuity across the board that relates to the comprehensive plan. You follow me? And I think that would be appropriate. And any time a neighborhood would be, I'm not going to, I can say it, invaded by a larger entity, I think it's appropriate to have something of record in place that you would have some degree of, some way to negotiate the changes. And I think that's it would benefit not only the city, but the neighborhood itself. Thank you.
Yeah, Robert.
I just want to provide some information on what you just were referring to. The neighborhood plans. Several of the neighborhood plans have actually been absorbed in the 2005 comprehensive plan, and they actually became part of that this plan, such as the King Park plan, from what I understand. Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association prepared a plan for that neighborhood, and it was the neighborhood's plan. It was an expression of that neighborhood, and it was written by that neighborhood. And that plan was accepted by this body, but it was not changed, and it was not adopted as an official element of the comprehensive plan. One of the reasons was because I think it was a wonderful expression of what the neighborhood believed, and it was written by the neighborhood. So if we made it an official part of the comprehensive plan, we might have to end up changing all these things in order to conform to city standards, and we felt like that in the process, we might, coming along at the end of the process, that might end up watering down that wonderful expression of what the neighborhood was trying to say was their positions. Yeah, so some of it depends on whether the city is involved from the very beginning or whether the neighborhood plan, we're accepting them at the end. And there's different ways that to have weight with neighborhood plans. So.
Dennis?
I would just like to add that when the comprehensive plan was created, the neighborhood groups were invited to submit a comprehensive plan in association with the overall plan. And so the Historic East Urbana Association actually did that at the request or the invitation of the city. So I think that should be considered as well.
Okay. Any other final comments? Then the motion is to send this ordinance amending the City of Urbana Comp Plan to include the Crystal Lake neighborhood plan, to send this to council next week, And the motion was by Charlie, seconded by David, I think. Any final comments? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion carries. We'll see that next week for a final vote. Then our next topic tonight is Ordinance 2008-11-132. This is an ordinance vacating a portion of Busey Avenue between Park Street and Church Street, and Bill Gray, the Director of Public Works, is here to present this item for us. Bill, good evening.
Good evening. Hi.
Sorry, Lynn, yeah.
A little bit.
Okay.
We recently received word that Carl Foundation had purchased the last property adjacent to this block of Busey between Church and Park Street, and similar to action that Council had taken several months ago in considering vacation of certain streets and alleys to accommodate the expansion plans for Carl. This is the last street that is involved with a dollar amount assigned to it. I would also inform you that there's one piece of an alley that is poised also to be vacated. This past week, I was told that Carl had purchased all the remaining properties on the south side of Church Street between Busey and Lincoln Avenue. So that will be something coming forward in the upcoming weeks. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Anyone ready to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we send ordinance number 2008-11-132, an ordinance vacating a portion of Busey Avenue between Park Street and Church Street to City Council with approval.
Second.
Seconded by Heather, okay. Any discussion? Yeah, Robert.
For the general public, I think they should be aware that this is in the MIC, this area that we're talking about. It wasn't brought up.
Definitely. Charlie?
Yeah, and I asked John Snyder for an update on where they are in their plans for the new building, and it's sort of in design. So, they've got state approval, and they're designing it. So I don't know at what point they'll be bringing it to us, but it's coming along.
Great. Okay, the motion's by Dennis and it was seconded by Heather. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? None? Okay, that motion carries. We'll see that as well next week. Next up tonight, we have Ordinance 2008-11-131, again, Public Works. This is an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of a mutual aid agreement with the Illinois Public Works Mutual Aid Network. Bill?
Thank you. A brief introduction. This is a project that's been going on for almost 3 years, and its scope is the state of Illinois in recruiting, combining various agencies into a mutual aid network, very similar, patterned after MAVIS, which is the fire mutual aid system, and then ILEAS, which is the police version. And I wanted to introduce to you Barb Steele, and she has from the beginning been involved with the formation of this statewide Public Works Mutual Aid Network, and it's appropriate that she discuss this with you this evening. But as this organization is getting legs and starting to crawl, at least for now, she'll be the group's secretary-treasurer. But anyway, Barb, explain what we're trying to do this evening.
Barb?
I've been working on this for about 3 years. The idea is that we will, I don't have the mic on, sorry.
There we go.
That we will provide assistance in time of need, and we may have times of need when we need to ask for assistance. There is a due structure that has been established where communities pay anywhere from $100 to $500 a year. Urbana would fall in the $250 range as far as an annual due commitment would be. At any time, if a community asks for assistance and we are unable to offer assistance to them, we can say no. There's no mandatory, you must respond 3 times a year or you're no longer a member or anything like that. I'm very excited about the program. There are many communities that are very eager to see public works departments organized as first responders and be able to count on each other in times of emergencies. And this is a program that we think will help get that going. So any questions you have, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Barb?
Yeah.
Mayor?
Do other states have this?
We're the first one to actually have a statewide mutual aid program for public works departments. There are programs that deal exclusively with water and wastewater, and they don't go beyond that as far as, if there's tree damage or a bridge collapses or something like that. So we're the first state to have this program.
Thank you.
Great.
Brandon.
Yeah, Lynn?
I'd like to make a motion to forward this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Okay, seconded by Charlie. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed?
Thank you very much.
Thanks, that carries. We'll see that next week. Thank you, Barb and Bill. Next up tonight, we have a resolution, 2008-11-023R. This is extending the Build-Urbana tax rebate program for 2 additional years until December 1st of 2010. And Community Development is here tonight. Take it away, Tom Carino.
Evening. You have before you a resolution extending the Build-Urbana tax rebate program for an additional 2 years through December 1st, 2010. The tax rebate program is a program that rebates to the owner of a newly constructed owner-occupied single-family residence the difference of what that home pays in taxes in Urbana versus what it would pay if that same home were constructed in the city of Champaign. The program was originally approved in 2001 with subsequent extensions in 2002, 2004, and 2006. Over 900 single-family residences have been built in Urbana under the Build Urbana program since 2001. A large part of that period coincided with a strong housing market, favorable interest rates, so it wouldn't be realistic to say that all 900 of those homes are a result of the Build Urbana program. However, anecdotal evidence would say that the number certainly increased on a per-year basis under the Build Urbana program. And also the feedback that we've gotten from the development community and the real estate community would say that Build Urbana has helped them in getting more single-family homes constructed in the city. Staff did conduct an analysis on the impacts of Build Urbana. The basic rebate and return on investment analysis was the first analysis we did, and that would indicate that the city and its taxing partners no problem. The city and its taxing partners, which includes the school district and the park district, are definitely realizing a positive return on investment on what they're spending in rebates versus what is coming in as a result of the program. But realizing that the potential costs of the program go beyond just the rebates versus what we're bringing in, the mayor did ask us to conduct a second analysis, which is related to the revenue generated by a single-family home, an average single-family home, including property tax, sales tax generated by residents of a single-family home, and utility taxes, versus what that same single-family home costs the city to provide municipal services to. And again, those are outside of just the simple, what are we paying in rebates? That's the real cost of the program to us. And our analysis shows that based on average revenue versus average expenses for a single-family home, the city's break-even point, where a home pays for itself, is at a value of $138,000 approximately. So what that means is a home valued at $138,000 will generate revenue equal to what it costs the city to service that single-family home. The median value of homes built under Build Urbana is just over $150,000. So what that would indicate is that homes built under the Build Urbana program, on average, are bringing in more revenue than they are costing the city to service in municipal services. The extension of the Build Urbana tax rebate program has been endorsed by the Urbana School District 116. It's scheduled to go before the Park District tomorrow evening. and that will work in that it'll be prior to your final approval next week. When the program was approved, it was not intended to be a perpetual program running in perpetuity. However, with the housing market being what it is currently, indications are that now would be a bad time to end the program. So staff is recommending the extension of the program for another 2 years based on a situation in the housing market. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Lynn?
I agree with staff. It seems like this wouldn't be a good time to stop it. I continue to be supportive of this program. I do think it's helped us in the past and will continue to in the future. And based on that, I'd like to recommend that we forward this on to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second?
Seconded by Heather. Any questions, discussion? None? Okay. All those in favor of sending this to council, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. Next up tonight, we have two ordinances and a resolution all related to the annual tax levy. So we will have Ron Eldridge, our city comptroller, here. Maybe Ron, if you could speak to all three items, and we could look at them all together.
Finally, we get the property tax levy and the somewhat illogical process that the state has given us. Starts with that truth and taxation resolution. But the first ordinance is the actual property tax levy ordinance, and it does have a high number in there. That is connected to the resolution, and what the resolution says, as we've done in the past, instructs the county clerk, once we find out what the true actual assessed value is, and that's usually in the first part of April, it tells the county clerk to lower that levy ordinance amount down such that we levy $1.29. And what I think that means to the current property owners, my estimate is that the current property owners will pay 2.9% more. That would be the average increase in the home values in Urbana for next year, and that is about $19 on a house that's worth $150,000. Now, I looked last year at this time, and I had estimated that the current homeowners would pay 3.9% more. The levy ordinance that we passed last year actually had a 12% increase, and I'd estimated it'd be 3.9. When we actually found out what the assessed value was on current homeowners, they actually ended up paying 2.7% more. So I had estimated that they'd be paying more than they actually did. It's difficult to figure out exactly what the assessed value is going to be, mainly because the new properties come on. You don't know if it's going to come on 100% or 75 or 50%, and you don't know if it's going to be there by January 1 when they take that snapshot photo. So it's a little difficult. The second ordinance is one that bases property taxes that are currently in place on a TIF bond ordinance. And without this, the county clerk would be instructed to go ahead and levy that amount. And this tells her that we have monies available in the TIFs and not to levy that amount.
Okay, any questions for Ron about any of these, which I think, if people agree, we could send them all three together to council. Charlie?
I'd like to move ordinance 2008-11-133, the annual tax levy ordinance, 11-134, the ordinance abating tax levy, and resolution number 2008-11-024R, a resolution directing the Champaign County Clerk to abate the tax levy.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Robert. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had one typo that you had pointed out to me. In the resolution in section 2 of the last page, I had the amount of $1,923,682, and that should be $2,056,699, which matches the other numbers in the resolution. So if we could note that correction.
Yeah.
Charlie and Robert, is that okay with you? Okay, a friendly amendment there.
Make sure you get the right number in there.
Yeah. I think this was section 2 on the very last page of text, up at the
resolution,
of the resolution. In section 2, the next to last line of section 2 had a 1,900,000 number, which should be struck and replaced with the same number that appeared in section 1, which was the 2,056,699, which is this year's general purpose, a general corporate purpose levy. Okay, any other questions or changes? All those in favor of sending these three items to council, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you, Ron. Next tonight, we have ordinance 2008-11-135. This is an ordinance from legal, an ordinance amending Chapter 15, Article 4, Division 1 of the Urbana Code of Ordinances regarding a criminal nuisance property ordinance.
Good evening. You have before you a very rough draft of, it takes portions of an ordinance that, actually that I drafted in a previous life. And, but I tailored this one, I kind of truncated that to tailor it to Urbana's needs. You also have before you a copy of 5 different ordinances from various Illinois communities, included Hoffman Estates, Schaumburg, Bourbonnais, Joliet, I believe, and Aurora. Let me start with my recommendation. My recommendation is that you keep this particular ordinance in committee for right now. It's my experience that this one is an ordinance that needs a really close look, and that there will be some concern from some property owners regarding the issue. But I've given you some other ordinances that are similar so that you could have an opportunity to read those, come back at the next committee, and see if there are things that you want to add or take away for as comparators. Essentially, what this ordinance does is, the modern, municipal law enforcement has found that in response to certain intractable properties in the community, that law enforcement response is not going to be the solution to the problem. It can only be an adjunct, something that they can provide support and respond to calls for service. Periodically in communities there are properties, apartment complexes, rental properties, certain businesses, be it bars, gas stations, clubs, wherein there's an inordinate amount of calls for service to attend to criminal nuisance activities. Things like murder are not nuisance. A homicide is not a nuisance. Prostitution, though, is a nuisance activity. Drug dealing is a nuisance activity in addition to being a criminal activity. And what happens is very quickly in certain, and it happens most frequently in apartment complexes, but it can happen in other places, this type of behavior becomes extremely deleterious to the overall safety and well-being of the neighborhood. So what this ordinance seeks to do is put some of the onus on the property owner. Just like if we had a bar owner who's a licensee in our community and there was a problem serving underage drinkers in that bar, we would expect that that's not going to be a complete law enforcement issue. We're going to put some of the onus on the bar owner and say, look, it is your responsibility as a licensee to police your establishment and make sure that you are putting in place certain measures to control the service of alcohol to minors. And much in the same way here, we're putting some of the onus on property owners when there are particular problem tenants that they do something about it. We want to work with property owners. This is not designed to be an adversarial process, at least not initially. If property owners want to have some idea of some languages that they can put in lease, we can offer model leases language that would facilitate or perhaps assist them in being able to eject certain tenants who were committing these criminal nuisance ordinances. We would hope that they would have that understanding ahead of time, but if they don't, certainly city legal, and I'm sure that, I don't want to speak too much for the police department, but I'm sure the police department would make recommendations to any property owner as well if they seek assistance in how to deal with certain criminal nuisance behavior. So essentially what this ordinance is going to do is to say if there are 2 or more instances of criminal nuisance behavior within a 6-month period of time, the chief of police may, doesn't have to, but may, at his or her discretion, choose to declare that that property is a criminal nuisance property, or a city police officer, if the chief of police is so designated, would be able to give that property owner or the occupant or the person in charge, the person in control of that property, a notice to appear in city court. And of course, the fines would be between $300 and $750. The activities that we would normally consider to be nuisance criminal activity would be mob action, assault, battery, unlawful use of weapons and firearms, unlawful discharge of a firearm. My experience has been that those aren't the biggies, but they do occur occasionally. It's the things like prostitution, public indecency, unlawful manufacture, sale, and distribution of controlled substances and cannabis, illegal gambling, or maintaining a place of illegal gambling. These types of activities frequently are the type that you'll get a lot of calls for service in a particular community. Fighting, batteries, that type of thing happens quite a bit. Other than that, the ordinance is pretty self-explanatory, and I guess I just want to begin if you all have any questions or anything else you would like me to provide to you so that you can evaluate for the next committee meeting as to whether or not you want to pass this on.
Dennis?
Thanks, Ron, very much. I did have a couple questions, and actually one of them you brought up just by covering that list that you had provided. In the list of definitions, there are 18 possible nuisance activities which might induce this property to be in trouble. And they're all, all these things do, of course, happen in a community. But what I'm wondering is the position of the two or three most likely reasons for continued callbacks, and one of them is family arguments, or you would call them domestic arguments. And the second one would be, partying and loud noises and things like that. But those are those considered not criminal nuisances? They're considered other kinds of nuisances, public nuisances, or why would they not be on the list?
Well, if you remember, we did pass the party nuisance ordinance.
Right, we did that one.
So that's the one that would deal more with loud noise and that kind of boisterous activity and the things that are concomitant with having, fairly large nuisance parties. In the instance of any sort of domestic dispute, typically only if it would rise to the level of battery, which you can see is number 3 here, and that would be a domestic battery, which would be good, something that would be prosecuted under the Domestic Violence Act. Normal arguing, I don't think, we don't want to get into the instance where we're having to make a subjective decision about whether an argument has risen to the level of being a nuisance. We'd actually end up probably finding just about every household in the community. So, we want to keep the things that are truly having a deleterious effect on an entire neighborhood. So, if it were to arise to the level where the police are getting several or continuous calls to a particular property for some sort of domestic battery or some sort of domestic assault case, then yes, it would be nuisance activity. The other part is that there's case law out there that suggests that a municipality cannot just make anything a nuisance. It has to be a nuisance in fact. So, for example, we couldn't say, walking on Sunday, on public sidewalk on Sundays between 1 and 3 is a nuisance, is hereby declared a nuisance, because it isn't a nuisance. It has to be a nuisance in fact. So, there could be a problem there with whether or not just arguing, domestic arguing would rise to the level of a nuisance activity.
I've got one more question. Because of the potential severity of the implementation of properties being a nuisance, I had questions about what constitutes the proof that it is a nuisance. You indicated that the chief of police could use his discretion, but what I'm wondering is, does it require something where the result of the nuisance takes a person to court?
No, you do not have to go to court. I'll give you an example. It has to be an official police report and something that a police officer has gone out and has verified. For example, there could be a particular, let's just take a 2-flat or a 4-flat apartment, and the neighbors could report, there's gunfire coming out. There's kids in the backyard or adults in the backyard, and they're firing off their gun. And by the time an officer arrives on the scene, everyone's gone. Everyone's scattered in the wind. But the officer goes in the backyard, and there are spent casings on the ground, and after speaking to neighborhood witnesses, they'd say, yeah, there were people standing in the backyard. We don't know who they were, but they were firing over there, and the officer goes and finds these casings. In that instance, no one went to court. There wasn't even an arrest made. Mm-hmm. But a call was made, an officer arrived, a report was made, and they were able to substantiate that, in fact, yes, there likely was gunfire at that point. That would be considered one incident. Mm-hmm. And so let's say the next day there was, hey, there are people in the backyard here or in this area, back in this shed over here, who are selling and using crack cocaine. So again, police officer arrives and sees that, and there's no one there, but they can see glass stems, crack pipes on the ground. There may be little containers that, based on the officer's experience and training, would indicate that crack cocaine had been sold. It might be noted also in a context that that area might be noted for unlawful narcotic sales, and so that would be 2. So now that property has 2 reports, verified reports of criminal nuisance activity, and there were no arrests made. But if we feel that there's something that the property owner should be doing, and there's ongoing criminal nuisance activity on that property, we would be trying to contact the property owner and say, look, you've got gunfire and drug sales and usage going on your property. We need to discuss what your plans are, what reasonable steps you're going to take to abate that nuisance.
But there's been no proof that the persons who were involved in that activity even lived at the house, the backyard, the property?
They may not be, but it's been my experience in enforcing this type of ordinance and reading up on it that there's a reason why it's going on that property. They may live there. We don't know. They may not. But in any case, it's your property, and this activity is continuing on your property. And I think it's the municipality has a reasonable and rational basis for coming to you and saying, we need to figure out what is going on your property. It may be that you need different lighting on your property. It may be that your tenants are inviting people, their guests are causing this problem. It could be that you're going to need to do something to secure your property against this criminal activity. It may be that if it's like a complex and it's a rental, that you're going to have some sort of security. There are a number of different things.
I think the mayor and Heather first, both had questions.
I can see, I can hear it now, getting phone calls from property owners and saying, well, the human relations ordinance doesn't give me much leeway. I have to rent to whoever because it's in the human rights ordinance that I have to rent my property no matter what. If they're released from prison and they're a rapist, I have to, based on the human rights ordinance, rent to them. So I can hear it now. Lots of complaints from property owners because of that. So how do we snuff that problem out? If we're going to pass something like this, how does it coincide with human rights ordinance?
Well, one thing to remember is that to the extent that you would not be allowed to discriminate against someone for a criminal conviction in renting to them, you certainly are not required to keep someone who is perpetrating ongoing criminal activity on your property. Our Human Relations Ordinance does not require that. So if, for example, you do rent to someone and they are violating a state, federal, local law or ordinance, you have grounds to evict them. And especially if you have written, which I would recommend to anybody that's a rental owner, that you have that written in your lease. The other thing is that this does not just apply to rental properties. This is to commercial spaces, homeowners. You know, you can own your own home and live there and actually still be subject to this nuisance ordinance.
So, I'm sorry, can I? So if, I mean, I live out in Behringer Commons, and say there's some teenagers who decide they want to have some alcohol, and they throw beer bottles or beer cans and whatnot in my yard, I could have someone call and say that, you know, 413 Behringer Circle, there's beer bottles in her yard, and I could be held responsible even though it was a teenage kid from who knows where.
Well, you remember now it has to be an activity that falls under the definition of nuisance activities. So, you know, the sole issue of having beer bottles in your yard, tossed in your yard, is not enough. There has to be some sort of criminal nuisance activity occurring that falls on this list. And if you all will, you know, take occasion to look at the other ordinances, their different municipalities have different things under their what they consider to be criminal nuisance activities. Some have fairly lengthy lists, like the one that I've created in our draft. Others have a few things. And so, you know, it's certainly subject to whatever this community feels are the ongoing issues.
Mayor.
Ron, I remember you saying that you drafted one of these for Aurora.
Correct.
Would you like to say what happened in Aurora before and after the ordinance?
Yes. I'm glad you asked me that, Mayor. I'll give you my whole experience. When we first started drafting this ordinance, and when I drafted it and it was publicized that we were thinking about doing it, there was great gnashing of teeth. You know, you would have thought the sky was falling by property owners and said, you know, how can I be made responsible for something that I didn't do? And I very much used the analogy that I just used with you about those who have alcohol licenses. Particularly with rental properties, it's a business. And as a business, you have responsibilities in the community, just like we hold other businesses accountable for pollution, alcohol, you know, whatever that they may be doing, we're going to hold them responsible for things that occur on their property. What happened was, after it was passed, I asked the police department to run a list of how many properties immediately would qualify. And in Aurora at the time, there were like 40,000 households. We got a list about this thick. The reality of it is that we don't use this ordinance and go after every single property. The ideal situation and what Aurora did was it had community-oriented police officers who would try to deal with, you know, intractable property owners on their own. And that usually was successful. Usually just by making a landlord and a property owner aware of a problem tenant, or making the property owner aware that this ordinance existed and that they were maybe the property owner was the problem, him or herself, making them aware of this ordinance and letting them know that there were some fairly stiff fines available to the city if this behavior continued, was successful. Aurora is the second largest city by population in the state of Illinois. A lot of people don't know that, but it's second only to Chicago. And in approximately 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, that I was there after this was passed, I had to actually prosecute only about 3 or 4 property owners. It just is not the problem that maybe some anticipate. Normally, if property owners know that, look, I have to police who's in my apartments, I have to police who's coming to visit my home. If you're a commercial business, you have to police who is hanging around and loitering on your property. For example, there was a gas station who liked to, I don't know if you all have ever seen these gas stations, these little glass tubes, they have little rose inside of them. It's just a little souvenir thing. Well, one gas station just loved to sell those. Well, guess who loved to buy these little glass tubes? You know, crack users, drug users. They take out the little rose, and that's a perfect little crack pipe. And so there was a particular gas station, there were all this loitering and activity going on with this particular gas station, a lot of calls for service. Did not have to prosecute them. You know, the police officers made them aware that, you know, are you aware that people are coming up here to buy these little grass pipes, and then they're hanging around in your parking lot, and we're getting a lot of calls for service. Well, this is not a big profit source for this particular gas station, so they stopped selling them. And, you know, with some police intervention and the vigilance of the gas station owner, the property cleaned itself up, and I didn't have to do anything. But we certainly made them aware. I frequently took it upon myself to meet with certain complex owners, which I've done since I've even been here in Urbana. I've met with certain owners where their property had some serious issues. We would frequently have sort of a tag team approach where we would meet with the property owner, and there would be a property inspector from the city, me or someone from my department, and someone from police. So we're sitting at the table and kind of giving this property owner an opportunity to truly understand the depth of the problem at their property. And I explained to them very politely and diplomatically that here was the problem and that the city would not tolerate this type of activity continuing. And, you know, here is the ultimate outcome. In Aurora, something I have not put in this ordinance that's before you, but in Aurora, we also had the power to close a building down. And Joliet does that as well, and I think there are a couple other communities that you have drafts of their ordinances before you. And what happens is, if the fines are not working, then we can seek to close either an apartment in a building, the whole building, or the whole complex. And that property owner would be required to empty out that property against all unlawful entry. So that means that they have to board it up. The city of Chicago has actually ordered some property owners to board up their property and erect one of those 10-foot construction fences around the property. Now, that's an extraordinary measure, but, you know, when you get a house that has become a crack house and no amount of police intervention seems to be quieting it down, you know, they'd have to take extraordinary measures. So that was another part of the hammer. So to answer the mayor's inquiry, it was very, very effective, I thought. And a lot of the particularly larger properties, whether they be hotels or apartment complexes or clusters of homes, it became much easier to persuade the certain property owners who really did not care, maybe didn't live in the community, much less in the neighborhood. They were from out of town, and we'd call them and say, hey, there's a problem. Like, yeah, talk to my property manager. So.
Mayor?
Deleted something. I'm assuming that what you took out was in section 5, because you say may take the following actions, and then you just have an A, and there's no
Right.
B.
I took
B was the closing of the the building.
I took it out because I wanted you all to see what it looked like without it, but I wanted to provide the very first ordinance that you have in front of you in the packet is Aurora's ordinance. So it's there available for me to put that in if you want to, but I left it out intentionally.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I saw 2 other hands. Lynn?
5A is pretty onerous, which I think is good. We need a tool like this, and it comes short of actually closing them down for good. But, to have an interruption of 2, 3, 4, 5 months in business of renting or whatever is a big deal, and in some cases almost like shutting down. So I think this is a pretty good tool, even as it is, and probably measured for our community, a measured approach.
Charlie?
Yeah, I know this kind of approach, plus, including some language like this in leases, was discussed when we talked about the rental registration and the property maintenance codes and all that. And I think all those pieces sort of dropped out at different points, as I recall, right? There are no pieces that relate to this in those ordinances?
I'm sorry.
In the property maintenance code and in the rental registration, we dropped all references to this kind of legislation, right?
I believe so. That's what I was told when I first came.
Yeah, I thought we needed something to do with some of the problem properties that we have in the city. We needed something tougher.
Right.
We didn't want to make it look, we didn't want to put it in rental registration because we're not trying to treat landlords like criminals.
Yeah,
that was a
and
whole different thing.
A couple of things that come to mind. We passed the nuisance party ordinance, and this is totally analogous to that, the way I look at it, and it's pretty rare that we have that kind of a situation or ban. I know Champaign has had a few more reasons to use it. So I guess for me, it's I need to know that we really do need to, the mayor thinks we need this. I'd like to have some examples of where we would have used it in the past. I know we've had several problem properties. I don't know whether Assistant Chief Connolly or Chief Bealey would like to speak to us about this in the future. But some examples might be good, and the constitutional challenges that we might face.
I could give you some examples. I really hate calling out certain properties. If you would like for me to communicate to you, over the phone or an email, what I can give you some very pointed examples of different properties, and let me just say that they involve apartment complexes.
Yeah, I guess we have 1 or 2 or 3 right now that would probably fall in this category. That's what you're saying, Jimmy.
And there may be 1 or 2 bars in the area as well. Let me explain that this is not a panacea ordinance, and it's not designed to take a scorched earth approach like the nuisance party ordinance. It's a tool. It's just a tool to have in the toolbox in the instance that we have certain properties that we have tried in other manners to get something changed, and for whatever reason the change hasn't been forthcoming, and they need to have a wake-up call. This would give us a tool to be able to say to this property owner, if you don't clean up this property and take reasonable steps, we are going to do thus and such.
Yeah, well, a quick web search shows this all over the country. Bremerton, Oregon, Iowa, a number of them in Illinois, New York has a couple.
When I drafted this in for Aurora, and that was back in 2003, it was already old. I mean, this was something that was already being used across the country, and that was one of the selling points, is that we were not doing anything particularly radical or innovative. I mean, there are so many aspects to this. Even in Aurora, if you were convicted or had to pay a fine under this particular ordinance, you had to attend a landlord training class that the city offered. I mean, there were a lot of different things that we were trying to do to try to help property owners to learn how to manage their property better. We brought in property owners who had come in and bought fairly downtrodden complexes and turned them around and made them super profitable by instituting certain changes in regulation. We had a judge come in and talk about what you needed to do to evict, the Forcible Entry and Detainer Act, what you needed to do to evict problem properties, and on and on and on. So.
I think this is great, and thank you for getting this rolling. We have a huge number of apartment complexes in Urbana. It's a big part of our housing stock, and so I don't want us to wait too long on this. This is a good thing. I think will be a good tool. And you mentioned just now the landlord training classes. That is a good idea. Why did you not include that in here for the first draft?
Because it was an extraordinary, it's a whole separate thing that the city committed funding and resources to, and it involved, staff from different departments all volunteering their time to come in on Saturdays to teach this class. It's all-day class. I mean, so it was a big deal.
They can't just come and hang out with you.
Yeah. So it's not. I'm not saying it can't be done in
Urbana.
But it was too big. Yes, it takes a lot of planning. It was a big deal. It's not something I just wanted to throw cavalierly into this ordinance.
David?
Well, I move we defer discussion and that we come back to this in 2 weeks once we've had a chance to stew over it a little bit.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to bring this back to committee. And just for calendar timing, I don't know whether we will have a committee meeting in 2 weeks on the 24th or whether that might be one that might be canceled, if I'm recalling the calendar.
I think it normally
It might be we'd see this in December.
Okay.
Any other discussion before?
I just wanted to invite you in that interim time, if any of you all want to email me with questions or suggestions or things, that's why I put these other ordinances in front of you. So.
Ron, I had two other, Charlie, if you have, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to make the next motion.
Oh, okay. Maybe while we're still on this topic, I had two other just pieces of feedback as you're thinking of writing. One is to make sure as you write the language of this that there's some clarity in who would be punished so that we're sure that other occupants who aren't really the offenders aren't hurt by this ordinance. I know, so if there's somebody dealing drugs out of an apartment unit, and then grandma lives there, or child dependents live there, and the grandma or the children dependents aren't responsible for the drug activity, that they don't fall victims of this ordinance. They've already got enough problems if somebody in their unit is dealing drugs or committing any of these nuisances. And so, in Section 3 or whatever, it talks about the judgment might be against occupants.
Well, I'd like to address that because I think that's a very important point. Obviously, with any ordinance, you have to rely on your legal division or whoever's prosecuting it to use a certain amount of discretion to determine. We don't want to beat up on Granny because her grandchild is dealing dope. However, what we do is go tell Granny, look, your grandson is 25 years old. He's not even on the lease. He shouldn't even be living here. And it's clear that he and his guests are causing problems with this at this complex, and you're letting them stay with you, and they shouldn't be. So, really, Granny, they got to go. Now, if this activity continues and Granny refuses to let her dear grandbaby go and won't make him move out, then we have to use some discretion and determine, okay, look, here's a problem. The other part of it is you cannot be engaging in the activity, but you can be acquiescing to it. So if you have a home, for example, that you own and you live there, maybe you have roommates and whatnot, and we bring it to your attention, or it's apparent to anyone who's remotely paying attention that there are drugs being dealt out of this particular unit, and you live there, and you're not doing anything about it at all. You're just like, hey, I don't engage in that, I don't have anything to do with it, I just live here. That's disingenuous, and we would probably be trying to work with the occupants as well as with the owner, and letting all of them know that together they're all responsible for fixing the problem. But to address your concern, trust me, Kurt and I have plenty of other stuff to do, and I know Kurt has more than enough cases in city court to deal with, so we would not be, trying to twist this and bend it to try to get more work heaped on us in city court.
Right, definitely. My one other piece of feedback was about timing. I know, one of the reasons you can be violating this ordinance is for failing to implement the reasonable and warranted measures specified by the police chief. And one trick there that you just might think about is timing, is if the police chief says, well, one of the measures is you have to install security lighting, how many days do they get to do that? What's their remedy for saying, okay, well, I had 14 or 31 days, and here's what I did?
We ran into that as well, and typically what we did, at least in Aurora, is if the police or property inspections or legal can see that the owner of the property is taking reasonable steps to fix the problem. For example, someone says, I've ordered a security system for the building, but it's going to be 3 weeks for it to get here and get installed in this entire complex. And stuff is continuing to happen in the meantime. As long as we know that they're doing the things that they can do immediately, and then the other more long-term things are in the process, we are not going to push back on that. It's only if we're hearing, I'm gonna, and then it's 6 months later, and this stuff is still going on, and they don't seem to be moving, that there would be some pushback from city legal.
Okay, thanks. Were there any other? Charlie, did you have some comment? Okay, Robert, no? Okay, so the motion was, I think, David's motion to send this to committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll see this again, I think, in December. Last up tonight, we have a closed session. Did anybody, Charlie?
I move that we go into closed session for the purpose of property acquisition issues pursuant to Section 5 of the Illinois Consolidated Statutes, 120/2, C5.
Okay, seconded by Lynn, and I think on this one, we'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Barnes? Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Mr. Garrick?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson? Mayor Pressing?
Yes.
Okay, we'll reconvene upstairs in about 2 minutes.